Welcome to another Smart QA Musings, which is just a gentle flurry of interesting thoughts. This is a bit of a continuation from what I shared last week on the idea of the role of synthesist as a role. And I'm just continuing the conversation this week in terms of, if I move away from being a specialist or a generalist and kind of go into the role of a synthesist, where could AI assist me in this role? And how can I have a more interesting, thoughtful partnership? So that's some of the ideas that I wish to present. So before I go on with some of the content that I wanted to share with you, I'm probably going to put a very simple poll, maybe a one-liner question poll, just to to see what your reactions are, what you think about it. Let me highlight the poll. What do you see the role of AI? What happened? Are you able to see the poll? Okay. No? What the heck is this? Why is that? What is happening here? Okay. Now 2 fingers are up, so it means you're able to see. Okay. Back to the list, and I will go back to the screen. I suppose. I hope the poll was visible. I really don't know what happened. My apologies on that. More often than not, I think today we have a lot of discussions that are transpiring, at least in some of the posts that we see in the context of AI and QA and so on. One set of posts talk about things of how it can assist in my doing with respect to a product release. Maybe in assisting me in design, assisting me in scripting, assisting me in some analysis, assisting me in reviewing, and so on. More often, they're centered around the notion of a current product release. And the question that I was grappling with was, is it only that? Could I use it and benefit it in a much more higher order? Could I elevate my thinking from the notion of a QA to a smart QA and therefore benefit from the smartness of machines? That was the idea, which also is probably the guiding spirit of the discussion today in this musings, right? So so just a couple of slides just to put that in context. Maybe I've just copied it from the last musings, which is, who is a synthesist? Not somebody who is just being a specialist and going deep, or not just a generalist who is looking at this stuff. It is certainly a combination and beyond. The idea is about one who is detecting emergence of new interesting facts, emergence of something. That was the idea. And what does that really mean? It means somebody, it's the role where it is it's probably looking at it from a larger system, so being fluent in system context, so on and so forth, searching for patterns, recognizing them, and making connections, not just to the product, just to the product, but the larger context of organization, customers, and so on and so forth. So being able to connect at a larger level, see maybe more interesting patterns, and looking at it from using the context and appreciating the context a little more. That is the idea of the notion of emergence, where I think probably the role of synthesis is handy. So we're probably elevating ourselves from the idea of role of an execution or of a validator in the context of a product to something more of a sense making, to try to see some interesting patterns, make some sense, and hopefully steer conversations, actions into a much higher level. Why? Because I guess the world is interesting enough today of rapid evolution, serious interdependencies, and extreme speed. Of course, it's velocity, as we would like to call it, because it is about direction. What that entails, possibly a slightly different mindset, right? In the mindset, the way we do, the way we think about it, the way we think about our role itself, the way we think about how we could contribute at a higher level, and so on. So maybe an interesting shift in mindset would certainly be a little more valuable, right? So what is probably a role, coming back to the topic of musing, is more of an insight enabler, not in terms of I am commanding it to get some things done, which I would do with a typical technology which is under my control, but more of an enabler of somebody who's going to help me or enable me to see some insights. And what does that mean? It means I spot signals. I look at seeing signals and amplify them, being able to go deeper to understand signals. What is signals? It could be defects, could be an example of a signal. Behavior of a system in real time suddenly slowing down, going up is partly a signal. The fact that we are probably churning a lot of code, making certain modifications in certain areas, and seeing some interesting anomalies is also possibly a signal. Maybe seeing that there is a rate at which certain usage patterns are shifting over time and we make them releases could be a signal. So things like these, which are signals, we're trying to see if we can get amplification. Why? Because I might be able to spot interesting patterns, the notion of emergence, and therefore help me to get some newer insights which allow me to do better work, maybe lesser work, maybe allow me to expand my role and offer a higher value to the organization and to the larger customer and community at large. So in a very high level notion, it is amplification of signals, spotting of patterns, and of course acting as an insight engine. And that probably is one of the key roles of the newer technology of AI, which we could benefit by. Right? So then what does it require? We talked about the shift in our thinking. So what is the model now? I am a human, I have a machine, which is behaving like a human, but it's artificial. What is my role? What is its role? How can we benefit? What's the context? Certainly, we as humans, our focus is on questions, making judgments, understanding and exploring the context, which is what we are really good at. So if I consider these to be my key roles, where can an AI help me with? Certainly it can help me with aggregating information from a variety of disparate sources, some within my organization, some related to the product, some related to non-product, some related from outside, some which is completely from external sources, wherever we can seek sources. And it can do it at hopefully with massive scale and speed, which we all understand. So it is allowing me to aggregate information, and remember, and therefore, we talked about the notion of signal amplification, pattern spotting, and therefore see some stuff. And of course, the whole genesis is a meaningful symbiotic partnership of questions to make sense of the aggregated data at a speed and scale which allows me to explore and understand the context and make some interesting judgments, discard some things which are stupid, see emergence of new stuff, and therefore hopefully do a far superior work. Right? And therefore the biggest partnership, the key idea of the partnership model, which I think we are used to in the context of coding, which started off with coding, the idea of a co-pilot. Not somebody who is a superior or a subordinate, but just being a co-pilot, right? So what we're really saying is, look, I am a human, I have got this piece, I have got somebody intelligent who's kind of helping me, and I'm helping him. And in that sense, we are probably in a very intertwined symbiotic relationship. A big shift, because all along we have used technology and machines as somebody subordinate, somebody that I have control over, that I can ask something to be done. Right? And that's a shift when it comes to this. And that's where some of these conversations, we are always good, and then kind of deriding a machine doesn't seem very logical. It is not that we need to exercise that kind of a control. There's nothing like control here. It is just that you can take it, you can discard it, right? So it is not that our role is any diminished. Yes, we have changed. We can morph to a newer, higher role, so to speak. Okay? So I'm trying to put this in the context of saying, like, what we've been trying to do is to say there is something that we do as QA. There is something probably elevated. I'm just calling it smart QA. What does this mean? That's probably where we are trying to do. We're trying to look at higher order sense making, the ability to go beyond. Certainly, one of our significant roles is in the context of a product and its release, which is what most of us are engaged with in differential roles. But is that all? So should I only use the AI? And some of you said, not necessarily. It can go beyond. So now what is beyond, and what are elements in that, and how does it help us in our role to amplify? So one way to look at it is, there is something that we do with the product, continue to do, but maybe there are things that we can go beyond, make higher order sense in the context of data related to the organization and business with respect to the product, which we shall see in a minute as to what they could possibly mean. And also look at data that we get from users, customers, experiences, which means real time after its deployment, so to speak, right? So I need not be therefore related to product related information, which are, test artifacts, development artifacts, build artifacts, and so on and so forth. I could also be looking at external information beyond the product, as in terms of effort, time, focus, churns, what I like, what I don't like, field issues, and so on and so forth, which are outside of the realm of the product release cycle. And that's the idea of saying going beyond. And if I dig in deeper, which is what I was trying to get to, is what does this require? In a way, for lack of any better word, it's like, I'm just calling it big data, kind of in the context of product and software engineering at large. On the product side, we see variety of data that we use, which we probably harness today in variety of different forms. We can add AI to that piece to some degree and certainly benefit from it, certainly seek some insights. Like what we do today is test cases and scripts and user stories and defects and any of those artifacts that are related to the typical stuff. But today we have access to other information. We have information, access, obviously, commits, code, changes, churns. We have discussions, we have meeting logs, we have comments on documents, we have comments on user stories, we have comments on variety of different work that we do. Could they be useful to us? Could we get some insights from those conversations and connect those conversations to what we have done and what we have done well and what we have failed, what we could do better, maybe? And that's one set of data, very broadly outlined as any kind of logs of discussions or comments on artifacts or product related, code related commits and system related, stories and specifications and design and so on and so forth, and test related artifacts like cases and scripts and defects and so on. And is it possible for me to synthesize something and see something interesting emerge? And can AI help? Yep, maybe. Second, context of organizational business, which is more often operational data, could be systems logs, could be support data, could be field issues, could be rollouts, kinds of rollouts, number of rollouts, reason for those rollouts, like patches, etc. Could be the effort that I spend. We could break it down into more detailed, granular type of effort, where I spent, time it took, maybe convert that into cost, and probably not limited to this. There's probably a lot more. I just put ... at the end. So here is some information that you do, which in some sense I do a diagnostic when I get into an organization to understand the state of practice. Would they help me there? I'm quite sure it could. It's just that the access to information may be interesting because each of these quite possibly is not available in a particular uniform format or even available in a simple textual format. It probably needs to be extracted from a variety of different sources. Some are in tools, some are unstructured data, and so on and so forth. But what would they help us? It will probably help us to make a higher order sense making of the practice, the process, the way I do things, the way I spend my money, the way I see activities being done and outcomes being generated, and therefore see if I can improve, if you will, the way I do things. So the first one is related to the product, the second is related to the making of the product, and the third one, which is the user and customer experience, is more often the externality, the understanding how people use, their comments, their sentiments, their feedbacks. If you have access to some more information of how this helped them or how it blew them, which could be business outcomes of rollouts, right? And I'm quite sure there's probably a little more. So you might ask, is that QA? Is it not marketing? Is it not product management? And that's where I think an interesting potential seemingly blurring of roles occur. In fact, I think there was an interesting post that I did read, I wonder when, maybe in the last week. So somebody was talking about, QA should do the A, B, C, D, E, and it seemed to kind of extend its role into its neighboring folks, which means how do I help product management? How do I assist in some aspects of marketing? And then somebody said, look, your job is to test, just shut up and test. So why are you going? Maybe the question wasn't, maybe the post wasn't, I thought was not, probably not framed as clearly, but I think the person was spot on. Spot on in saying that it's not anymore a narrow role. There are certain roles, there are certain plays that I have, which could be meaningfully useful for other people and therefore benefit what I do and therefore elevate myself. And I think growth often by definition means you're constantly moving in some sense upward. And upward means two things: embracing newer and bigger things and probably dropping or adjusting, some of the lower things. And that's how we grow. So for many years, for probably decades, we've been doing things, the same things probably for a long time. Maybe now it's, there are far more interesting tools available at our disposal, which have been intelligent enabled, which can allow us to leapfrog. And that's an interesting possibility, I suspect, in the current time, in the age of now. But the conversation to a larger degree now is probably limited in some sense in the context of QA to the product related aspects. So how can AI help in probably building clarity? Can it review some content? Could be like specs. Could you improve my criteria? Could you figure out a better set of conditions? Could it review some designs and stuff? So basically it's in terms of clarity of what is given or seeking clarity by conducting some, interesting experiments, ask questions. What happens if? How does this work? What are some possibilities? So basically you are trying to learn and expand your knowledge in a synergistic role, probably in a Gen AI fashion outside of your document. So all that probably is to a larger degree enhancing the clarity of thought of what we do. And therefore it's assisting me in my journey of clarity so that I can hopefully do a better job of assurance. Some of them could be as early in the life cycle. second kind of stuff could be in terms of going out and say, okay, not only assistance, but also, helping me figure out, come up with some hypotheses of what could go wrong, of what could be potential impact, and so on and so forth, right? It could churn out some hypotheses based on past data that I have fed. Maybe it has access to a more vaster knowledge beyond me in terms of facts, and therefore, if I do probe well using the Gen AI, maybe I get some interesting suggestions in terms of hypotheses of areas to focus on, aspects to focus on, things to try out, and so on. Right? So it could be at the lowest level hypotheses as in terms of issues, areas, methods, and maybe scenarios, flows, and so on, right? Which is again related to product validation. Certainly, this is one I think people constantly do talk about also, the ability to, design test cases using AI. And there is obviously the fear that if it is just going to give you some set of test cases and you somehow execute it, is that right? Is that not mere checking? That's a valid question. But again, the idea here is the importance as a companion. You use it as a companion, not use it as I outsource the work to you, right? So is it a helpful companion? Certainly in terms of design, to help me design things in whatever form. It could be flows and scenarios and cases and data and script and so on and so forth to help me do my job of activity validation in the context of a product release. Going further down, maybe detecting of risks, maybe me trying to figure out areas of risk because of a change in environment, because of a change in my code, because of a change in my usage pattern, and so on and so forth. So can I use it in an intelligent fashion to possibly detect change and readjust my plan, learn to focus a little more strongly on certain meaningful areas? Possibly, yes, right? Again, remember, it's a synergistic co-pilot type approach, not outsourcing type or control type approach, right? And finally, the notion of signal analysis. So I get a lot of signals. We don't know if it's good, right? Signals could be available in terms of textual signals. It could be available as metrics and measures, however you may call it. But basically, they are signals. They could be available from different sources. Some could be very straightforward, as in terms of issues or comments. Some of them could be coming from a log. Some of them could be coming in from a support issue or a field issue or a field comment and so on. So it could be comment and so on. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to look at how I could possibly leverage AI as applicable to analyze some of these signals and make better sense. So if I can make something emerge out of it, if I can see a little more interesting pattern, then maybe I revise my work of how I do. But remember, all these that I've tried to kind of broadly outline of some of the ideas is in the context of me being a synthesist with a specific focus on the current, if you will, the product release, right? And what we saw earlier was to kind of say, may not be limited to only this. It could stretch beyond the realm of a particular release. And the only challenge is, how do I get access to some of those data and what do I do with it? And it is not necessarily as what should I say, a structured kind of a notion. Right? So the larger play is higher order sense making to enable insights, which is where we started off by saying it's not just limited to the notion of a product, but to look at data, information, signals from the organizational context. So, for example, to highlight one example, which I would probably do which I normally do, not probably, I normally do when I work with an organization in a consulting fashion, is to talk to people, hear their feedbacks, take copious notes, written and voice. I may transcribe and read through that to understand what they're saying is done well, what they're saying is not done well. Bit of a diagnostic exercise is what I'm doing into the practice and process. In addition, I also obviously look at certain artifacts of what they have done in terms of plans and cases and defects and so on, but also in terms of artifacts related to business and organizations. I go beyond the product stretch into business in terms of saying how many times, how much is the effort, where do you spend more, where do you spend less, and so on. So look at some of the available data that they have in various formats and use it, and also probably get some idea from them in terms of what challenges they have faced from their customers, what do their customers feel, and so on. So I'm obviously, in some sense, as an individual, trying to synthesize data from all these three circles on the right, and that's what this is. But I'm using it more often for initially the diagnostic area, right? And what am I trying to find out? I'm trying to find out what are areas that are done well, what are areas that could be done better. And that's part of my consulting advisory scheme of things based on my methodology in the larger context of smart QA. All I'm trying to do probably is just this higher order sense making and try to see if I can seek some insights and therefore find out if my insights are meaningful, talk to the people concerned, and if they find that probably this is the right thing, then figure out how to work with them in a consulting advisory implementation mechanism. Could I benefit from UI? I have used small bits of it, but I think there's a much, much larger work to be done in that area. But certainly I feel that it is not anymore related to the notion of a role of a synthesist just in the context of AI. So what does that fundamentally entail? It requires me to change for me to harness that power as a synthesist along with my AI counterpart, right? And that is, I need to let go of the notion that I'm in control, and therefore I need to be in control, and therefore use the tool as my slave. It's more often more like I'm moving from the idea of control to curiosity, and I'm using my co-pilot, my partner, my AI partner, to help me to find some information to satisfy my curiosity. I move away also from the notion of stricter rules to a broader understanding. That is, I'm using the co-pilot to explore, to understand, to go down, to figure out, to help me teach rather than, help me just follow some set of rules and use that therefore as an intelligent tool to implement my rules. And therefore, it simply means I'm not anymore just an executor. I have a larger philosophy at play. And that philosophy is what guides me to work with the co-pilot, so to speak, or the AI tool or the AI partner to help me blossom better. And that is where I think methodologies per se come in very handy, because ultimately the highest part of the methodology is governed by some philosophy, and there is certain methods which, certain techniques, etc., which form part of the methodology principles and guidelines, which are useful to have, which go beyond the role of execution, roles, and control, because they are more often subscribed to the idea of philosophy, understanding, and curiosity. And one such methodology which I've been party to is the HighBest, which is what I've been working on for many years, various versions. But to me, they are very useful, and there could be a bunch of different methodologies that come into play, not just one, which could ultimately help us to harness the power of UI and power of AI and play therefore a much more meaningful synthesis role. So in a closing remark, I think, what I find fairly exciting and interesting is the ability to partner with somebody intelligent, with at least the same intelligence as me, or probably better than me. And therefore, I view this as not losing control. It's about me gaining more clarity. And that role of, that notion of me as a synthesis trying to ultimately seek emergence to by deeper insights, therefore treating the notion of AI and its corresponding tool sets or partner as more of a partner is exciting, interesting. As with every human, I guess, systems will also make some mistakes. We call them hallucinations sometimes. That's okay, I guess. As long as we don't totally give, neither is the system going to take over from us, neither am I going to give away the whole handiwork to them. It is just that collaborative mechanism of working, I think, probably has. I know we all appreciate this philosophically, but sometimes the conversations that come along in the post don't seem to indicate that as much, because we somehow are worried, are we losing our place? And I think, like any technology, I think it redefines our role, redefines the scope of work, and in some sense forces and enables us to elevate ourselves, to go to higher levels. Thank you so much.